Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. There is a lot happening in the world. We just celebrated the anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, and there's been a lot of acts of terrorism and a new poll out that shows that opposition to U.S. foreign policy, specifically that of going into Iraq, is increasing in Europe and in other places in the world. My guest this week is Dr. Ken Wise of Creighton University. He's an associate professor of political science and international relations at Creighton, and he has had almost a career-long interest in the United Nations, NATO in particular, how countries can possibly work together. You've probably seen more strife than you have working together. What's happening now with the bombing in Spain and ousting the prime minister and bringing in the socialist prime minister that might pull out of Iraq? I mean, what can you characterize from a political science point of view the climate that we're in right now?
Well, first of all, you said perhaps we have more conflict than cooperation. That's because we see the conflict. We tend to ignore the cooperation.
That's like the news business. They say, why do you have bad news? Because that's unusual, that when we pay attention to those things.
It distorts our view of what's really going on in the world. And understanding how the cooperation occurs is, from my perspective, more important actually than how the conflict occurs. What's going on in the world? The United States, with this administration, began with an image problem. And it has, instead of being able to overcome the image problem in much of the rest of the world, it has actually made it worse. He came in with a style problem, the cowboy, and then the cowboy confirmed the image of cowboy in much of the world's eyes by behaving unilaterally, what to the world looks like unilateral behavior on our part. And this isn't going down well.
No, and there is I don't know how the election's going to come out, and I'm not going to make any political statements, but there is a strong feeling among how much we don't know in the United States, but a good chunk of people, that we need to remain strong. September 11th is still very strong in our minds, when we feel, in fact, I don't think there's been an attack that large in terms of property and people in a good long time, probably since World War II, perhaps. But anyway, the feeling is that we have to stand strong and tough. But the question is, we're talking about global trade. We are global everything, just about right now, and we can't. Going it alone is. What are the ramifications of that?
The administration, of course, wouldn't accept that statement, going it alone.
I know. They had
to them. Well, of course, Vice President Cheney likes to trot out the figure 35. We have 35 countries with us on our team.
But the
in
numbers in terms of people that went over there it's almost as if we went alone, is it not? I mean, our U.S. numbers.
Our proportion. But one of the UN's very first peacekeeping actions, Korea, the U.S. provided 95% of the troops in that operation. So this isn't unique. This isn't.
We do have the biggest army, I think, working army.
This isn't new in that regard. But the way we went about it, the way we went about making the decision and deciding the timing of the entering, who we talked to and listened to before we acted, that is quite different at this time.
All right, let's talk about, you said there's more cooperation than it would seem, than we're hearing about. The conflict is what we're hearing about. That's probably normal. And
this is normal, yes.
We backed off of working with the United Nations before we invaded Iraq, and the way the Security Council is set up, I mean, will we ever be able to get cooperation from differing points of view, political philosophies in that body on major either troop commitments or idealistic commitments or whatever?
This spins a little off your earlier statements about strength. What constitutes strength? In the popular mind, often in the United States, when we're talking about strength, we think military. To me, and you ask what does a political scientist see, to me, strength is the ability to accomplish one's goals. Some goals you can accomplish with military strength. some goals, if you attempt to use military strength, you can't accomplish. You go the opposite direction than you wish to go. So if you want to work with the United Nations, if you want to be somewhat skeptical or cynical at the moment, if you want to have the nice blue blanket wrapped around you, the nice blue flag of the UN wrapped around you, if you want to have a visible approval of the international community, you take your time, you engage in conference diplomacy, you listen carefully, you treat others with respect.
There was a feeling, at least in the Bush administration, that we didn't have the time to take. And whether they listen to the right people or not with regard to weapons of mass destruction, that remains, we may find out what people think in this country, at least, come election time. But because things do take time, and there will always be the question of whether that time can be taken, and waiting for just to find out someone's going to veto what we're thinking is the right course of action.
We made our choice. We chose not to listen. We decided to go past the build-up level that would have made sense in terms of being able to cooperate with the United Nations. We went past the build-up level of between 40 and 50,000 troops surrounding Iraq. 40 to 50,000, we were sufficiently intimidating Iraq that they were then cooperating with inspectors, contrary to what our administration would characterize the situation. That was going. That number, 40 to 50,000, probably could have held out in place through the rest of the spring and summer last year. And if Iraq were not cooperating in the fall, or had any weapons of mass destruction been found that had been hidden and not declared and so on, we would have had the opportunity to finish the build-up in the fall and attack in the fall. We chose not to do that. We chose to tell the United Nations, take a hike. We believe our own propaganda, and we're going to go in.
All right, now we have a situation where I believe in Iran, they've kicked out the weapons inspectors. I know there have got to be people saying, how, that's a really important thing, this weapons of mass destruction, and how we kind of keep the balance of that in the world. How we sort of keep a lid on it, so that rogue nations, coup d'etats, things cannot go boom and hurt people, lots of people. So now we can't seem to get these countries, first Iraq, then Iran, right next door to each other. Does that mean, we're going to go to Iran? I mean, how do we get the European Union, because there are a lot of European countries that are increasingly kind of opposed to what we did. How do we build this consensus?
If what you really wanted to do was stem development of weapons of mass destruction and create a situation where democracy could blossom, then you would have attacked Iran, not Iraq. That situation was ripe and ready, and that we didn't work with the leadership of Iran is what has contributed. We refuse to have normal relations with them is what has contributed to the collapse of the reform movement in Iran, which now puts the conservatives in charge, and they can play all kinds of games that they want to for a while with the United Nations. Al-Baradei of the United Nations Atomic Energy Agency is negotiating and is getting routinely agreements and movement, despite the newspaper headlines, toward having further inspections. They've already had some further inspections in Iran, and I believe that that process will go forward. Some of the troops in Iraq, U.S. troops and others in Iraq, may have to turn and face toward Iran very visibly and make noise that direction to remind Iran that it does need to cooperate. And the UN will welcome that action on our part.
What does the White House, the Bush administration, have to do now? It's been said from the White House, from the the spokespeople there, that they may look to the UN to try to keep the new Prime Minister of Spain from pulling troops out of Iraq, as he has threatened to do. What could we do with the United Nations to keep that from happening? What is our next move? Should it be in order to
keep that from happening, or promote its happening?
I mean, keep them from pulling the troops out.
To keep them from pulling the troops out means that we have to promote using the United Nations.
Okay,
it serves the interest of both the Bush administration and the Spanish administration. With the termination of the return of sovereignty to Iraq and the termination of the active, visible governance of Iraq by us, it is then a nice time to say, okay, UN, you take charge of the military operation, you take charge of the peacekeeping. The moment that the UN passes that, then Spain will stay.
The United Nations can't even decide now, regardless of Spain, or couldn't before the election, whether and to what degree it was going back, because it pulled out, as you know, after the bombing in front of their building that killed their ambassador.
But the discussion so far with the United Nations has been they're coming back to run peace building operations, to run civilian government, to run services for the public. We're talking now about asking the United Nations Security Council to take charge of the military operation.
Now, that would be a good thing? I would think in terms
if
of
the United States wishes to
world
withdraw
opinion.
or reduce its presence, and if it wishes to rebuild its credibility with the international community, yes, that would be a good thing.
What chance, we've made a deal sort of that we're going to try to hand the reins of government over by the middle of this year, right? Almost
Correct.
smack dab in the middle of the year. This time is going to go very quickly, and there's a lot of uneasiness all over that country right now.
Yes.
So how do we, if you were the master of the world right now, how would you get in this short time? I mean, 3 months isn't a very long time. 3 months, we're almost at 3 months right now. To get the United Nations to, number one, agree to come in, and number two, for that to happen, and have the world, the Muslim world, the European countries think that we're all working on the same page.
The moment the United States takes the position that it is ready to talk about multilateralizing the running of the military occupation of Iraq, we will have all kinds of cooperation. Planners in the United Nations, of course, have been working on this all the time, starting 2 years before we invaded Iraq.
So there are ongoing plans that
yes.
if agreements are made on these kinds of things, that troops can be deployed, et cetera.
The one outcome of the discussions could be, for example, that the United Nations, the blue flag, would be the titular leader of the multilateral peacekeeping force. The actual force, as in Afghanistan, might be from NATO, where the U.S. dominates.
Okay. You are familiar with the poll that came out about a week ago, when this show airs, it'll have been about a week, that by the Pew Research Center for the People in the Press. They did they're a pretty reputable group, and they did a survey in Europe and in some of the Muslim countries, and opposition to the United States sort of position in Iraq and how we're attacking terrorism is increasing. And even in Britain, who is our closest ally, it's jumped about 20%,
Right.
18%. How do we greet that as a country that's may possibly have a change in the White House or not have a change in the White House? How do we digest this information? Or do we just say just a poll?
If you're asking me how the White House will respond, I don't know. What that poll gives us in the general public an opportunity to do is ask, why do the Europeans see this so differently? Particularly the Europeans, but major countries elsewhere in the world as well. They see it differently because they never did link Iraq to the war on terrorism. That was U.S. doing. That was our mental concoction. We created the image of there being a connection between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, which never existed. May be coming into existence at this time, but we created that. The rest of the world does not see that. The rest of the world agrees with us on the war on terrorism. The rest of the world says, why do you have terrorism? Because you have 40 to 50 countries that have weak governments, weak states that can't run themselves effectively, and they need your help. That's where we could be working instead of where we are in Iraq. This is how the world, especially in Europe, sees it. Why aren't you helping these 40 to 50 countries in the world strengthen their governments instead of attacking Iraq?
All right, then you have the whole other question. Sure, the linkage of Iraq with terrorism, they're kind of upset with that. They were on board at least for the looking for the weapons of mass destruction.
No.
They weren't?
They were not. If you're talking about the people, which is what the Pew survey is looking at, no, the public said, let the United Nations do its business. You have 700 inspectors and the possibility...
That's what I mean. They were on board with the United Nations.
They were on board with the United Nations,
Yeah,
not the
that
US.
goal, that track they were on.
Yes, indeed. They said, why didn't you let the United Nations finish its work?
There are a lot of people in this country who just would say, as you put it, United Nations take a hike. There's been an anti-UN sentiment in this
Correct.
country for a number of years. We didn't pay the dues, and there's just been this that they're not even going to listen to us. They're not going to work with us. What's the sentiment on the other side? The members of the United Nations that aren't the United States, which is all except us. How do they view?
It depends where you cut into the discussion. At what stage in that motion picture film of reality in New York you decide to start looking. Each state that is there, each government that is there, has its own interest.
Like the Russians had the interest of that Iraq owed them so much money. I mean, there were a lot of financial interests as well as ideological interests.
They wanted to go back to trade. They said, look, this inspections business is not working. Why don't we just forget it and go back to life as normal? And if something comes up, we'll deal with that when it comes up. Well, the U.S., particularly this administration, when it came into office, had no ear to hear that at all. They would have nothing to do with that. This administration came into power in January 2001, intending to attack Iraq for whatever reason. And this is before 9/11.
You believe that?
Yeah, absolutely, I believe that. He wanted to kill my daddy, unquote.
Oh, no, but
Speech in Texas. Cheney, Mr. Weapons of Mass Destruction on the mind ever since he was Secretary of Defense, and unfinished war in Iraq when he was Secretary of Defense.
Well, that's a pretty...
Rumsfeld, who wants to do in terrorism, he wanted to attack 40 places in the world at once when we went into Afghanistan. Rumsfeld wanted to attack 40 places at once.
Now, where does
in the
this
world.
come from? I mean, I don't remember him saying it.
Woodward's book, Bush at War.
And it's fairly well documented, although there's probably a couple
Woodward
of...
lived in the White House for 6 months. He had access to everyone, and not secret documents, of course, but the normal passage of information in the White House. That is an astounding book, which is radically different from all the reviews made of it, written on it at the time it was published.
And it was published when in relation to the attack on Iraq?
That I believe, I could be correct.
Was it
incorrect.
before?
I believe it was done in October or November of 2002.
Okay, so...
It was, he published just after we had entered in Afghanistan.
Okay, so we have a situation, as they say. We have a country that is considered by many people as the superpower, with the fall of the old Soviet Union. We're the big gorilla in the living room. Okay, we're not to be ignored, but how do we get to be discussed with and get things going? Because right now it seems like there's a standoff.
Yes.
So,
You listen. Stylistically, for this administration, that seems to be extraordinarily difficult. They seem incapable, most of the time, of listening to what someone else has to say.
What about Colin Powell?
He was interviewed on a network television show last week. He was asked at the end of the interview, well, would you serve in the next administration? And his face changed expression at least 3 times, if not 4, before he put word to his answer of, that's an inappropriate question.
Well, Rumsfeld did the same thing.
Rumsfeld's another matter.
But I mean, they're all being asked that question,
Of
and no
course.
matter what they had to say, that's for the president, kind of, to say. But what do you think about Colin Powell in terms of, as we watched him through this administration, apparently at odds at times with the White House?
Correct.
Does he have the right idea? Is he a listener?
Definitely. Condoleezza Rice's role in this administration is not as a policy guide, is not as a policy czar, which has often been the president's National Security Advisor's role. Her role is to keep peace between or among Cheney, Rumsfeld, and Powell.
Seriously.
Seriously.
I mean, you really believe this is true?
Woodward, Bush at War. Read that book. There are incredible telling scenes, which, if you are a strong supporter of this administration, you read one way. If you're a political scientist, you read a very different way. Woodward has written skillfully and quoted extensively.
So you're saying that she's spending a lot of energy doing that as opposed to what we think the National Security Advisor should do.
I'm not implying that she should be doing something else. I'm implying that it's almost a full-time job, apparently, for her to keep peace among these people. And that's what the boss, Bush, expects her to do, requests that she do.
Colin Powell's been very quiet, really, relatively speaking.
Certainly since...
in the whole world scene since Iraq.
Certainly since the presentation he made at the UN fell apart.
So what do we do now? Listen, okay. You say listen.
Correct.
We have the whole Middle East thing that's sort of fallen apart.
Israel and its neighbors.
And that's really key, I think, to, coming up with getting that going again, working with whoever we need to work with to get that going again. And as long as that seems to be, to me, and I'm very shallow in my knowledge of world affairs, but that's really important. And we just haven't heard a lot about it.
It's extremely important, and it's so emotion-driven and involved. This administration, again, came into office, as do most administrations, saying Israel is our friend. Fine. Not often, however, does an administration say, in effect, to the leader of a country, go do whatever you want to do. We won't stand in your way.
Do you think that so this sort of laissez-faire approach to Israel, but then the roadmap, we had a roadmap.
Going where?
You're shuddering.
Going where? The administration said to Sharon, go do whatever you think you need to do, whatever you want to do, and at the same time we invaded Iraq, figuring that would bring peace to the region. Because everybody who opposed us would be intimidated, would back off, and those who support us would have the flowers of democracy blooming in their front yards and backyards and side yards, and all would be lovely in the world.
Okay, there might be people sitting across the state of Nebraska, all, not thousands that watch this show, but certainly some. And they're saying, well, Carol's, just this bleeding heart liberal, and she's got this anti-Bush guy on, and who, who's not looking at maybe some good side of what Bush has done or what Bush could do.
The good side is often put forward as, well, we got rid of this horrible dictator who was hurting his people.
Well, and that's the line over and over again.
Right.
I mean, that's what we're hearing
right.
on the.
But why Iraq? Why not 40 other countries that we might have invaded to improve the political life and human rights
the
of
rest
those
of the axis of evil, or whoever else is out there?
Anywhere.
The thing about terrorism that is so scary, and it almost overstates its importance in relation to other things, is that there used to be sort of rules of engagement. I'm using that in the wrong way, but a country declared war on a country, and you sent your young men, and in some cases young women, out, and it was always awful, but we more or less, other than when bombs sort of went astray, we tried to keep the armies against the armies, or the military against the military. Terrorism, we've always known about guerrilla warfare, we've been involved in guerrilla warfare, but this has got everybody just so rattled that I wonder if we can all talk as a bunch of countries together on how to solve this. You mentioned helping build up governments that are struggling, and so what have they got to lose?
Other governments in the world, the governments in Europe, talk with us, work with us, cooperate with us, share intelligence with us on the war on terrorism. No problem. As I said before, they do not include Iraq in the war on terrorism.
They may have to if these insurgents
but that
come
is
in.
a mess that we created in their eyes, and therefore in their eyes, that we have to uncreate it, and that is going to require using the United Nations.
Okay, so if the White House decides that they're going to work again with the United Nations to make people like the new Prime Minister of Spain a little more comfortable with what is happening, and Colin Powell trots over to the UN, what's going to happen? Is it going to take Bush to actually make the president to actually make a foray into their world and
Which he
talk?
tried in September of 2002.
Right.
He tried to say, here's our case, but he also included a phrase in there which suggested, and if you don't see it our way, take the highway. He has to come in with a rather different tone. I'm not saying he's incapable of that. I haven't seen it yet, but he may be able to do it come this summer. Which says, okay, we're having some troubles. We've accomplished some of our goals. We need some help to accomplish some other goals. What do you think? Now that public speech that we will give will not have a productive outcome unless we've already moved minds to be ready to receive it.
Okay, what
But
has
that
to
you
do sort of that
that you do-
mental preparation?
You have to do that privately.
That's all
called
done behind
diplomacy.
the scenes.
That's called diplomacy.
Because you have to put the leaders of those countries in a comfortable position with the kind of poll numbers that are coming out of those countries. Because we see what happened when the majority of the people in Spain, or so it seemed, that didn't want to send their people into Iraq, and then you have a bombing, and then you have an election.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to generalize from what happened in Spain to what could happen in other countries. in Europe
No,
also.
but
Okay.
I mean, that's a lesson to look at. It's one possibility. You need to sort of say to the leaders of those countries, we're taking you seriously, we're taking
Yes.
the opinion of your countrymen
Yes.
seriously.
And these are our goals. These are the steps we see that might work to achieve those goals. These involve your cooperating with us in this fashion. What do you think?
Okay, let's say
What do you think?
I'm really
of what I'm
pro-Bush,
saying?
but I agree this has to happen. We have 30 seconds. What would you, if you were a confidant of President Bush, tell him, thinking, I want you to stay in, I think you're a good leader, what would you tell him to do?
Put Cheney back in a box. That's the first.
And quickly, the second step?
Encourage Powell to have an all-points press behind the scenes with the heads of state and the foreign ministers around the world saying,
And that wouldn't make us weak.
no, this is strength.
Okay. I want to thank you for being, we run out of time as always. Dr. Ken Wise of Creighton University, and the beat goes on in terms of this situation around the world, so I know you'll be watching and we will too. I want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.